Okay, let's take a little time to go over the paper assignment and discuss some of the key points. Now, I'm not going to read the paper assignment to you. That would be kind of silly because I know you can read and I don't want to take up your time that way. So you should have a copy of the paper assignment printed out next to you as we go through this so that you can follow along in the assignment. Before we get started, I should give you a really quick summary of what this paper is supposed to do, because I think that will answer most of your questions to begin with. Basically, you're supposed to take one concept that we've discussed, whether it's the horror is outside us or inside us, or defamiliarizing the familiar, or the paradox of the past, or elements of either European or American Gothic, or elements of the undead, or aspects of domestic horror, some specific literary concept that's covered in the videos. And you're going to take that concept and show how it's demonstrated in at least one novel and one short story or film. And that's all you're going to do. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do any outside research for this paper. All you need to do is to choose one aspect that's presented in the videos in terms of what horror is or how horror works or a particular form of horror, and show how that's demonstrated in one novel and one short story or film. That's all the paper basically is. The first thing you'll notice is that there's a due date and time for your paper. And yes, I expect your paper to be submitted in Microsoft Word to Canvas by that date and time. The Dropbox will close down at that time, and I don't accept late papers. So you need to make sure that your paper is submitted through Canvas at that time. And I will provide you with a video on how to set up MLA paper format in Microsoft Word, because it does have to be in Microsoft Word and no other program. And no, I don't accept PDF versions. It has to be in Microsoft Word. But I have a video that shows you how to do MLA paper format in Microsoft Word. I have a video that shows you how to do in-text documentation, a video that shows you how to do the works cited page, and a video that shows you how to submit papers through Canvas. Some of those videos were originally made for other courses that I teach, but the process that's used is going to be the same. Okay? So you'll know, I'll give you information on how to do everything you need to do before you write the paper, but I do expect it to be done that way. Okay? That's why I'm giving you the information. So what you're going to do is you're going to write a paper that's 5 to 7 pages long, plus the works cited page. So that's 5 pages of writing plus the works cited page, not 4 pages of writing plus the works cited page. It's got to be an MLA style and use MLA documentation, both of which you should have learned in English 101, although I do have a video for both in-text documentation, and I provide you with the works cited page, and I show you how to use that in the video, so that shouldn't be a problem for you. Okay? And of course, since it's a formal academic paper and it should be written as a formal paper, you avoid first and second person pronouns, contractions, and informal language. That's all just stuff you should have learned in 101. Okay. For the literary works, what you have to do is you have to use very specific details from at least one novel that's assigned for the class, which would be either The Shining, The Other, or Zombie. Then in addition to that, you will work with either one short story or one movie. That's the minimum basic requirement. You have to have one novel and either one short story or one movie. Now you can add to that to a degree. If you want to discuss a novel, a short story, and a film, that's fine. If you want to discuss 2 novels and a short story, or 2 novels and a film, that's fine. If you want to have a novel and 2 short stories, or a novel and 2 films, that's okay. But I wouldn't go much more than 3 or maybe at the most 4 works that you're going to discuss, because you're going to discuss the works in detail. I don't want a shopping list of every story that aspects of domestic horror shows up in. That's not what I want. I want you, for example, to state that an aspect of domestic horror is demonstrated in A Rose for Emily, and give me details on how the story demonstrates that aspect of domestic horror. Okay? I want an in-depth discussion of one major point that we've discussed in the class and details about how 2 or possibly 3 works demonstrate that aspect. Okay? Don't use any works or films that aren't studied for this class. It's not an idea of, oh, show me what you know about horror. It's show me what you've learned in this class. Okay? So you have to use works assigned for this class. Now, if you're writing on cosmic horror, if you're writing on Lovecraft, that's kind of an exception. Lovecraft didn't write any novels, so obviously, if you're writing exclusively on Lovecraft, you can't write about a novel. I can't assign one because there isn't one. If you want to write specifically about Lovecraft, you kind of have to take a different approach to the paper than you would if you wrote about anything else. So you need to email me and let me know that so that we can work on details about what your paper should include. Now, if you are writing on, say, an element of American Gothic, let's say that you're writing about isolation, and you're using The Shining as a novel, and you're talking about isolation in The Shining, and you want to use one of Lovecraft's short stories as the short story about isolation, that's fine. You can do that. But if you're going to write specifically about, for example, the Cthulhu mythos and how the Call of Cthulhu and the Dunwich Horror fit into the Cthulhu mythos, then you're going to be working with a completely different aspect that isn't going to be demonstrated in any of the other works we read. Okay, so if you want to write exclusively about Lovecraft, you can, but we'll have to work out the details on the paper together. Okay, and you will cite all of the novels, short stories, and films using appropriate in-text citations and on the Works Cited page. Now, I've given you a master Works Cited page, and all you have to do is cut and paste the entries for the sources that you use. But I even have a video showing you how to do that. Okay? So the Works Cited page really shouldn't be a problem. The in-text citations shouldn't be a problem if you learned what you should have been taught in English 101. All information that comes from an outside source, essentially all information that isn't very common knowledge, you have to cite a source for. So anything that you put in any academic paper that is above the level of there are 50 states in the United States, Canada is north of Mexico, there are 90 degrees in a right angle, summer comes after spring. Okay? If it's not that general, then everything in a paper has to cite a source. And it can't be simply, oh, I knew that from high school. No, you have to find a source and cite it. Now, one of the things that's going to make this class easier is that I've given you all the information you need in the video, so all you need to do is find out who said it and cite that source. It should be very simple. But in general, that's what you need to do in every paper. It's not just direct quotes that need citations. People come out of 101 thinking that for some reason, and I don't know why. Everything has to be cited. Even if you put it in your own words, yes, you need a citation for a summary or a paraphrase. Because you have to remember that what you're citing is not just the words that you took from somebody else, it's the idea that you took from somebody else. Okay? So, you'll definitely need to cite a source for information about the aspect of the literature that you're discussing. Generally, that will be the source that I use in the videos. And then, of course, you have to cite the novel and the short story and film, and the short story or film, pardon me, that you use in the paper. The conclusions you draw on, for example, let's say that you're writing about elements of the European Gothic, and you decide to use The Shining as the novel, and the aspect that you're talking about is that there's a woman who is dominated by an impulsive and tyrannical male. Okay. First of all, you would start out by saying that that's an aspect of the European Gothic, and you would cite the Robert Harris handout for that. Okay. Then you would go into the novel and you would pick an instance where, for example, Jack is impulsive. Let's say that it's the section of the novel that discusses what happens when Jack breaks Danny's arm. Okay? And you summarize that section of the novel. And you cite the pages that that section appears on. Then after that, you show how that action that Jack took demonstrates the impulsiveness that Harris says is an element of European Gothic. The conclusion you draw from the passage you summarized, and you apply what Harris says to that passage, the conclusion and the connections you draw are your own thoughts, right? And since those are your own thoughts, those obviously don't need a citation because you don't have to cite your own brain. Okay? The paper does that for you. So that's pretty much how the citations work. The requirements for literary criticism. There are 4 types of literary criticism that you can use. You can use written sources that are supplied for you through handouts and through textbooks in the class. For example, The Gothic Tradition by David Stevens, which is where that we have, for example, the selections from The Monk and the selections from Wuthering Heights. It's that skinny little blue book. Okay, it has 3 or 4 chapters at the beginning, maybe it's only 2, that explains a lot of what I went over for the European Gothic, and also includes some other information. Similarly, some of the novels that we read have forewords and, after notes and various kinds of material like that. You can use that material if you want to. Okay? So that's one place that you can get material from for your papers. The documentaries. Okay? Literary criticism that's provided through class videos. Okay? And actually, all of your research can come from that. You don't have to go out and do any outside research if you don't want to. I don't really expect you to. Although, as it says, you can do it. And he goes through and tells you here that one avenue for the material that you can use is written sources that comes from the Gothic tradition by David Stevens. There are some articles and handouts that I might or might not post on Canvas, the prefaces and introductions and so forth. Okay? And you want to cite them using MLA in-text works cited formats. But this is kind of important. If I post an article to Canvas, for example, there are several articles that I use that are connected to A Rose for Emily, and I go ahead and I post all the articles. I don't assign them, but I post them in case you want to use those for your paper. Okay? Post them. You're going to cite them as if you read the actual article from the actual journal. You're not going to cite them as something that you downloaded from the internet that is a copy of an article from a journal. There is a way to do that, but it's very complicated. And I don't think anybody who isn't a grad student should have to deal with that kind of complication and citation. You're not an English major, most likely. And if you are, you're going to learn how to do those complicated kinds of citations in later classes. For a 200 level survey class, simply citing it as if you read the actual article is good enough. Okay? So that's basically what this is saying. And if you cite materials from handouts I write up, if I provide any of those for you, which now that I'm teaching online, I generally don't, but if I do, there will be some kind of citations for the sources within that handout, and you will use those citations as if you read the articles that are cited in the handouts. Again, there's a way to decided that you took it from a handout that cites this articles, but it's all too complex to learn if you're not an English major. Okay. Okay, the documentaries that we view in class. There are two of them. There's Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, which we refer to quite a bit, and there is the documentary on Lovecraft. And then you also can get documentaries from other sources if they're applicable. They're kind of hard to find, although you might be able to find some through the library because the library does tend to provide videos along those lines much more than, say, Amazon or Netflix or Hulu or any of those places. Okay. For everything that we use in class, all of that stuff will be on the works cited on the master works cited page that I provided for you. Okay. And you want us to cite the documentaries in MLA style. But the new form of MLA that came out in spring of 2016 requires that you put in parenthetical citations information about the exact time in a video that information appears, similarly to how you would use page numbers. I think that's ridiculous. I just really do. We never had to do that before. I think that that's a ridiculous requirement. It's particularly ridiculous for undergraduates. You don't have to get those times, okay? It might not be the same in a documentary that's presented someplace as it would be on a DVD because there's always time lapses and um, when you digitize something. I mean, it's too confusing, it's pointless, and it's a lot of work. So just don't do it. I think it's a silly requirement, so we don't do those. You might need to in other classes, though. So just because I think it's silly doesn't mean everybody else will. So keep that in mind, okay? Okay. Most of what you're going to take for your papers, in fact, I would think all of it, is going to come from class lectures which are presented in the videos. Okay? The reason that I recommend that you stick to those is not because I cover everything that's important and not because I cover things better than anybody else does. Not at all. It's because it's difficult to find this information. It's hard enough to find information you can understand on any form of literature. But when you've got a marginalized literature like horror lit, it's hard to find a lot of that research material. The way that I found most of it is I bought anthologies of writings that, well, you should know what an anthology is. I'll buy an anthology of writings on, say, psychopathology and serial killers. Okay. Um, I might use two sentences from one article, but I had to buy the entire book, and the book might have cost me 50, 60 bucks. Okay. I don't expect you to do that kind of work. That's ridiculous. It's taken me years to put together this information and a ton of money buying books. There's no reason for you to do that. I teach the class. Of course, I'm going to do extra research. You guys are just taking a class as undergraduates, and that's a lot to expect of an undergraduate. So most of what we do will be provided in the videos, and that's really all I expect you to use in the paper. Okay? And it talks about some of the reasons here in the paper assignment sheet. Okay? But you need to take notes on the videos, or at least know which video deals with which, and then when you decide to write on that, go back and take notes on the details. If you see what I'm saying? Because I do expect information from the videos to appear in most papers. Not all of the videos, only the videos that apply to what you're writing about. Okay? And I do, as you know, identify the sources for the information that's provided. I always say, for example, Whisker states, Whisker says, according to Whisker, according to Stevens, according to Lovecraft, etc. So I always identify what source the information comes from, and that's who you cite in your paper. Okay? And then, as I said, there's a master works cited page that's posted to Canvas. I do expect you to spell the names correctly on the sources, or at least spell them the way that I had them spelled on the works cited sheet. Let's put it that way. Because if I misspelled something, that's not your fault, that's my fault. And I don't ever hold my students responsible for my mistakes. That would be ridiculous. Um, and I mentioned this when we discussed The Shining in the video. Okay? For God's sake, if you write about The Shining, spell the name of the book right. It's Shining. It's not Shinning. So please make sure you spell the name of the book right. Okay? Uh, Spell things the way they're spelled on the works cited sheet, and you'll probably be in good shape. Okay? And again, it says cite the sources as if you read the articles, but of course you won't have page numbers. So if you're citing Whisker, you will put her name in the parentheses with no page numbers because you don't have the page numbers, right? And I don't expect you to go out and buy Whisker's books and find the page numbers. That would be silly. And the video on how to do in-text documentation goes over that to some degree, so I'm not going to spend time doing it right now. Okay. You can conduct outside research if you want to. Okay. Particularly if you're going to talk about how literature from a particular period encodes the societal fears of that period, you're probably going to have to find a history textbook to get information on what was going on in that period and cite that history textbook. Okay? And you should be able to find those in the CSN library. Don't use websites other than the library databases for information without clearing those sites with me first. Okay? Websites are notoriously wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You can't believe much of anything that you find on a website. They aren't kept up to date. They're not necessarily written by expert sources, and they aren't very often suitable for academic research. Take Wikipedia, for example. Okay. Now, I love Wikipedia because if I'm sitting at home and I'm watching a movie and they mention something that I don't recognize, I can go to Wikipedia and get a good enough idea of what they're talking about for the purposes of understanding the movie. I would never, ever cite Wikipedia in an academic paper. We don't know who's posting that information. Nobody edits it. Nobody's checking out the expertise of the people who are posting things. I could go on to Wikipedia and post something about an internal combustion engine, and I don't know anything about internal combustion engines. Okay? There's no editing on the web, and that's what makes it unsuitable for most academic research. There are exceptions, but not very many. So if you're going to use something from the web that doesn't come through the library databases, you have to contact me to make sure that the source is acceptable. Okay? And as I said before, I knew that from high school isn't an excuse to not cite a source. You have to have a source for information, and you should have learned that in English 101. We don't spend a lot of time discussing how to write literary criticism or how to document sources. I do provide you with a video with a couple of videos actually on documentation and a handout on writing literary criticism, but we're not going to spend a lot of time going over it because you should have learned that in 101, and this isn't a writing class. But you're always free to ask me questions about your paper, okay? Ask me anything you want to. Send me drafts of parts of your paper if you want me to. I'm here to help you, and I want to help you. But you have to keep in mind that if you wait until the last minute to write the paper, I have, any place between 25 and 30 students in this class. I have between 25 and 30 students in a world literature class, and I have about 40 to 45 students in my composition courses, and they all have questions because they all have papers due during finals week. If you wait till the last minute, I might not be able to answer your question because I only have about 10 or 12 hours a day that I can work. Okay? So the sooner that you ask me questions, the more time I have to devote to your paper. Okay? And here are the questions that you can respond to, which finally gets down to something that isn't really basic. Okay? Um, you can select one of the themes that we discuss, and this is what a lot of people end up doing. And the themes are uh, beginnings, which covers the introduction to European Gothic and the introduction to American Gothic, the undead, which covers the introduction to the undead material, the short stories assigned for that, um, the movie we watched, and The Shining. Okay, and the movie is probably 1408. Another dimension, Lovecraft, that's all just the Lovecraft stuff. Domestic horror would be the introductory videos to domestic horror, the short stories that we read for that, the movie Carrie, and the other. And Madness and Murder includes, of course, the introductory material for that, including the material on serial killers, the Poe short stories, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates. The film is Seven, and the novel is Zombie. Okay, that's just to give you an idea of what I mean by these units. Okay. And you'll work with your class notes from the videos and postings from the discussion board on the theme with specific details from at least one novel and one short story. Or instead of the short story, you can use a film. Okay? They have to be works that were assigned for the class, but they don't have to be works that were assigned for that unit. And I keep bringing this up because The Shining in particular works for a lot of different units. We read it in connection with the undead because it's a haunted space and there are ghosts and things, so it fits in well there. But it also works very well for domestic horror because we're talking about horror within a family setting and within a home, and that pretty much falls under domestic horror. And, pretty clearly it could be used in Madness and Murder because we do watch Jack's slow descent into madness, and clearly there's murder in it, or at least attempted murder. So The Shining could be used for any of the sections except the Lovecraft section. Because, as we noted, there are elements of European Gothic in The Shining, and there is at least one element of American Gothic in The Shining, so you could use it for that unit too. Another example is that you could use the other for Madness and Murder. It's assigned in the domestic horror unit, but it could be used as an example if you're discussing aspects of Madness and Murder too. Okay, so the works can kind of float from one unit to the other, but you can choose one of the units and the aspects of horror discussed in that unit and apply it to works that were assigned other units. If that doesn't make sense, email me about the works that you want to use in discussion of what aspects of horror, and I'll let you know whether it's all right or not. Chances are it is. If you work with some aspect of horror that I've taught in this class, and you work with two works that I've taught in this class, and you see how they're linked, that seems fine to me. Okay? One aspect that we don't talk about as much, but which is definitely true, is that horror encodes the fears of a particular time and place. So, in other words, a particular culture and a particular period within a culture. And Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue does a good job of discussing that aspect of horror. It also does a reasonably good job of summarizing some of the fears from various periods in American history. And it's possible that, for example, if we're going to talk about how Carrie encodes fears of women becoming stronger because of the women's movement, you can cite Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue as the historical information source because you got the information from there. Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue gives us a good indication of what fears are during various decades in the United States or during various periods. They didn't always fall into decades. Okay, so you might be able to take a lot of the history information from there. If you need more information on an historical period, that's when you need to do outside research. Okay, but take a novel and either a short story or film and show how they demonstrate the fears of the period they were written in. And it doesn't have to be the same period. As we've already talked about, Carrie encodes some of the fears that are associated with the 1970s. Okay? Zombie, on the other hand, encodes fears that are more from the 1990s and maybe even current day. Those are two different historical periods, and it's fine if you use two different historical periods. You don't necessarily have to work with the 60s and find some story that demonstrates fears of the 60s and some novel that demonstrates fears of the 60s. You're not restricted that much. Okay? And again, if you have questions about that, you can always email me and check with me. The next one is the where does the source of horror lie, which is kind of the horror is out there, the horror is in us situation. Um, and as we noticed, even in works that we read where the horror is out there, there's often some kind of horror that comes from inside of man involved too. So, what you'll want to do is you'll want to pick one novel and one short story and decide whether you want to state that the evil that creates horror comes from out there or the evil that creates horror comes from inside man, and use one novel and one short story to demonstrate that. Okay. Yes, in almost all cases, as Whisker tells us, it lies on a continuum. So you're very seldom going to find things where the horror comes from out there exclusively, but choose either that horror comes from out there or in here, and select one novel and one short story or one film and show how that's demonstrated in that short story or that film. The literary criticism for that information would be taken from Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. Okay. Another one is the idea of horror defamiliarizing the familiar. And we talk about this a lot throughout the course. Okay. So again, pick one novel where the familiar is defamiliarized and show how that works, and one short story or film that has the familiar defamiliarized and show how that it is, and that's pretty much what you would do. Same thing with the paradox of the past. We talk about the paradox of the past in several of the videos, and you would again decide to write about the paradox of the past and show how it's demonstrated in one novel and in one short story or one film. And remember that the paradox of the past is basically that we can't escape it and we can't recall it to change it, right? So if the past is somehow influencing the horror in a work, it would probably fall well under paradox of the past as a paper topic. Certainly, The Shining, that's one of the major themes in The Shining. Uh, Rose for Emily, which is under domestic horror, we run into a lot of paradox of the past there. So the pieces don't have to come from the same unit that we discuss. Okay. And then write your own question. There are a lot of things that we discuss in the course of this course um, that might appeal to you and that you might see how works are connected to them that I simply didn't think of when I wrote up this assignment sheet. Uh, Assignment sheets can't cover every idea that occurs to students, but your ideas are sometimes as good or even better than ours. So, by all means, if you have an idea for a paper topic and a couple of literary works that you want to work with, run it by me, email me, and tell me what it is. And as long as you're not just summarizing the works, I'll probably okay it. In fact, I'll probably be thrilled to read a paper about something that you guys have seen that I didn't see. And I might even end up adding it as a paper topic in the future. You never know if it appeals to me enough, because I do get paper topics that way. Okay? Just make sure that you clear it with me first, because I'd hate it if you spent a lot of time writing a paper and the paper ended up being good. It just wasn't an appropriate paper for this class. That would be heartbreaking, considering, that this paper constitutes a fairly large portion of your course grade. So just email me 99, in fact, I can't remember a time that I've ever turned down um, a suggestion for a paper topic. But to be on the safe side, you need to clear it with me first, okay? And then you're going to submit the paper as an attachment in Microsoft Word. It has to be in Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word is available on every computer on all 3 campuses. It's available, I think, at the public libraries on their computers. It's available at various businesses such as some FedEx sites. Office Depot, I think, has computers that you can use, and they almost all have Microsoft Word on them. And you've known about this paper assignment actually since the first week of school, so you should have been able to, by finals week, find a way to write one paper in Microsoft Word, even if it means that you type it up in a different word processing program at your home and then just go and retype it in someplace in Microsoft Word. You should be able, over the course of 3 months, to find a way to do that. Okay? And then you're going to submit it to the 223 paper Dropbox, which will be posted in a couple of different places. It's posted this week. It'll be posted on an assignment page for finals week that it won't have anything really except for the Dropbox. So make sure that you submit it to the Dropbox, and it has to be turned in by the date that's on the top of the assignment sheet. And I don't accept late papers. Now, I went through this rather quickly, and since I basically worked off looking at the assignment sheet, and I didn't write out a formal script like I usually do and try to stick to that, some of the information might not be as clear as I would like it to be or as you would like it to be. Don't hesitate to email me for clarification. I'm always happy to clarify anything that students want me to clarify, and certainly in connection with the paper topics, I'm happy to answer any questions you have or to work with you any way I can. All you need to do is get in touch with me and let me know what your questions are and what you need help with, and I will help you as much as I can, as many times as I can. But, you have to let me know if you have questions, because I'm not very good at reading minds. I really can't read minds of people who aren't in the same room with me. I can't read anybody's mind, so don't worry about that. Okay? Okay, but if you do have any questions, you know that you can email me from an account other than Canvas at deborah.okie@csn.edu. Thank you so much. I hope that this video wasn't too confusing and helped you understand the basics of what you need to know to write your paper. I'm really looking forward to reading the papers. I always get some really interesting papers from this class. And, I'm not as picky as it might sound like I am. I'm interested in seeing what you learned and how you see that it applies to the works we read. And what interested you to a degree, because I hope that you found something interesting enough in this class to write a paper about. If not, I'm really sorry. That would be heartbreaking to think that you found the class so boring that there isn't anything about it that you're willing to write a paper on. To the degree that any of us is willing to write papers, we'd all rather not write papers, wouldn't we? Okay, well, I will talk to you soon. Until I do, you have a great day, and do get in touch with me if you need help, because I do want to help you, okay? Okay, bye-bye, folks.